Hey 521 Exchange. Today's devotional is looking at Daniel chapter 6 as we continue going through Daniel's book. And so today's passage is one of the most famous stories in the Bible. It's Daniel in the lion's den. And so what happens is Daniel is serving in the Persian kingdom now. So he was in Babylon, if you remember. And in yesterday's devotion, we talked about how King Belshazzar died and the Persian Empire, or your Bible might have said the Medo-Persian Empire, came in and took over Babylon. And so this is sometime later. Daniel's most likely a grown man, and King Darius is the king of Persia at this time. And so Darius is ruling over Persia, and Daniel's there, and Daniel has spent time as a wise man in the kingdom of Persia, and God's giving him a lot of favor in his position and with the king because of his faithfulness to God. God's blessed him. And so King Darius over time has seen Daniel and seen how faithful and wise he is, and he's promoted him up through the ranks. Now this has made some of the other officials and wise men jealous of Daniel because Daniel's getting so much attention. He's so good at what he does. So the other wise men have this idea: let's get the king to make a law, because here's the deal. We're never going to find anything wrong with Daniel. He is just that above reproach. The only way we'll find something is if his religion and his faith conflicts with what is right for Persia. And so they go to the king and they say, "King, you should make a new law stating that for the next 30 days, people can only worship you." Because in many cultures in that day, the king or the ruler or the pharaoh, if you're in Egypt, was considered to be a god themselves. And so they come before Darius the king. They're like, "King, make a law. You can people can only worship you for 30 days, no other gods." And so Darius says, "Okay, that's fair, we'll do that." So he makes this law. And as we read through this passage, we see that there is kind of a tradition in Persia at this time that once the king signs a law, it cannot be undone, even by the king himself. Once a law is made, it's set in stone. And so what happens is Daniel hears about this new law, and you might think that his reaction is to be afraid or worried because he's going to worship his God, or should he compromise in his faith? Like, what's going to happen? But Daniel's reaction to this is that he goes upstairs to his room, he opens the windows so people can look right into his room, and he gets down and he prays and worships God just like normal. And so Daniel seems to be unfazed by this. His faith is first and foremost in God, and so he continues following and seeking after God. Now, the other officials and satraps, as you might understand, go and they see Daniel like this, and so their thinking is, "Yes, we've got him. He's going down." And so they rush to the king. They say, "King, your wise man Daniel, he hasn't obeyed the law that you made." And what's interesting is we see that Darius is actually grieved by this. He's upset because he likes Daniel. But the other officials point out, "King, you can't go back on your word. You've made a law, and the traditional law of the Persians is once you make a law, it's full. It's final. There's no way around it." And so Darius says, "You're right, there's no way to get around it." And so regretfully, he takes Daniel and they cast him into the lion's den. What's neat, though, we see some interesting characteristics about Darius. As Darius casts Daniel into the lion's den, he is seen here in Scripture calling down to Daniel saying, "May your God protect you." And so even though this is a foreign king who is being worshipped as a god by his people, he is looking at Daniel because Daniel has so much favor with him and saying, "Daniel, I really hope that your God is real and that he's able to save you tonight." And so they roll the stone over the lion's den. Daniel's down there, and Darius goes to his room. And what's interesting is, it says this in verse 18, "Then the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. No diversions were brought to him, and he could not sleep." He spent intentional time. Fasting was a way of seeking the God's favor. And so he spent this time focused on what it would take to get Daniel out, praying that Daniel might come out of this. And at first light, verse 19 says, "First light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he reached the den, he cried out in anguish to Daniel, 'Daniel, servant of the living God,'" which is awesome because he's acknowledging Daniel's God. The king said, "Has your God, whom you continually serve, been able to rescue you from the lions?" And we know how the story goes. Daniel looks up and says, "My king, my God has saved me. Because I'm innocent. I haven't done anything wrong, nor am I guilty of anything before you." And so the king, King Darius, is overjoyed because, again, he likes Daniel, and he orders that Daniel be brought up immediately. And the king realizes that his other officials have done this as a trap to catch Daniel, and so he casts these other officials and their families into the lion's den. And Scripture says before they even reach the bottom of the den, the lions are upon them. Yeah, that's kind of harsh. And what we see in this, as it ends, King Darius goes and he writes this edict or this issue to all the land of Persia, proclaiming that Daniel's God is a living and true God, and that people must, Scripture says, tremble in fear, but they must be in awe of this God. And so because of Daniel's faithfulness, even though this was an incredibly trying time, the king of the greatest nation on the earth at that time has acknowledged that his God is true and has issued a decree to the entire known world that they must be in awe of this God. Now for us, what this means is that in life we will face a lot of times where following God in our faith is dangerous. It's scary. It's uncertain. We don't know what's going to happen. God didn't promise that when Daniel got thrown into that lion's den that he would protect him. He didn't. Daniel had faith that God would be with him. And I think kind of like when we looked at the fiery furnace a couple days ago, his mindset was probably, even if God doesn't save me, I'm still going to worship my God because he is the one true God. And so Daniel clung to his faith. And his faith is the important part in this passage here, because his faith is not only what saved him, his faith that God would be there, but his faith was also what showed King Darius that God was a true God. And see, in your and my life, we have opportunities to share the story of Jesus every day. And we should do that verbally, telling people the gospel. But also our life and our faith is a witness to people. And sometimes the way that we are faithful to God, even when everything screams against it, even when it's difficult, is the biggest testimony to others that what we believe is true and that our God may just be the one true living God. Guys, I hope these are an encouragement to you. I hope that you're diving in and seeing how good God is, that he is a God who desires that we are faithful and that shows off his faithfulness to us. I hope your week's going good. Middle schoolers, we had a blast last night. High schoolers, I'm excited to meet with you tonight. We have something special planned for you. If you have any questions or comments, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this passage. Feel free to comment down below, shoot me a text, or message us on Instagram, and we'll talk with you soon. Love you guys. Have a good night.